Chapter 4. Basui's Dharma Talk on One Mind and Letters to his Disciples. Editor's Introduction. In the year 1327, toward the close of the Kamakura era, the strife-torn, anxiety-ridden period of Japanese history that produced so many notable religious figures, the Rinzai Zen master Basui Takusho was born. Having had a vision that the child she was carrying would one day become a fiend who would slay both his parents, his mother abandoned him at birth in a field, where a family servant secretly rescued and reared him. At 7, Basui's sensitive religious mind began to evince itself. At a memorial service for his late father, he suddenly asked the officiating priest, "For whom are those offerings of rice and cakes and fruit?" "For your father, of course," replied the priest. "But father has no shape or body now one, so how can he eat them?" To this the priest answered, "Though he has no visible body, his soul will receive these offerings." "If there is such a thing as a soul," the child pressed on, "I must have one in my body. What is it like?" To be sure, these are not unusual questions from a thoughtful, sensitive child of 7. For Basui, however, they were only the beginning of an intense, unremitting self-inquiry which was to continue well into manhood. Until, in fact, he had achieved full enlightenment. Even during his play with other children he was never free of these uncertainties as to the existence of a soul. His preoccupation with a soul naturally led him to think about hell. In an agony of fear he would exclaim, "How awful to be consumed by the flames of hell!" And tears would well up. When he was 10, he relates, he was often awakened by brilliant flashes of light which filled his room, followed by an all-enveloping darkness. Anxiously he sought for some explanation of these weird occurrences, but the replies that were forthcoming scarcely allayed his fears. Again and again he questioned himself. If after death the soul suffers the agonies of hell or enjoys the delights of paradise, what is the nature of this soul? But if there is no soul, what is it within me which this very moment is seeing and hearing? His biographer too relates that Basui would often sit for hours stewing over this question in a state of such utter self-forgetfulness that he no longer knew he had a body or a mind. On one such occasion, at what age we are not told, Basui suddenly directly realized that the substratum of all things is a viable emptiness, and that there is in essence nothing which can be called a soul, a body, or a mind. This realization caused him to break into deep laughter, and he no longer felt himself oppressed by his body and mind. In an effort to learn whether this constituted true awakening, Basui questioned a number of well-known monks, but none could give him a satisfying answer. At any rate, he told himself, "I no longer have doubts about the truth of the Dharma." But his basic perplexity as to the one who sees and hears had not been dispelled. And when he saw in a popular book one day mind is host and body guest, every one of his quiescent doubts was suddenly resurrected. "I have seen that the foundation of the universe is voidness. Still, what is this something within me which can see and hear?" He desperately asked himself anew. In spite of every effort, he could not rid himself of this obsessive doubt. Nominally Basui was a samurai, having been born into a samurai family. Whether he actually pursued the duties of a samurai his biographer does not reveal, but it seems safe to conclude that Basui's continuous search for Zen masters would have given him little opportunity, and presumably as little taste, for the life of a samurai. At all events, we do know that Basui had his head shaved at 29, symbolizing his initiation into the Buddhist monkhood. For the ceremonial rites of a monk or priest, however, he had little use. Believing that a monk should live a simple life dedicated to attaining the highest truth so as to lead others to liberation, and not engage in ceremony and luxurious living, not to mention political intrigue, to which the priesthood of his day was only too prone. On his numerous pilgrimages he stubbornly refused to remain even overnight in a temple, but insisted on staying in some isolated hut high up on a hill or mountain, where he would sit hour after hour doing zazen away from the distractions of the temple. To stay awake he would often climb a tree, perch among the branches, and deeply ponder his natural koan, who is the master? Far into the night, oblivious to wind and rain. In the morning, with virtually no sleep or food, he would go to the temple or monastery for an encounter with the master. So strong was Basui's distaste for the ceremonialism of the temple that many years later, after he had become master of Kagakuji-3, he always insisted on calling it Kagakuin instead, the suffix in meaning hermitage as opposed to the more grandiose ji meaning temple or monastery. In the course of his spiritual journeys, Basui eventually met the Zen master through whom his mind's eye was to be completely opened. Koho Zenji, a great Zen Rashi of his day. The lesser masters from whom Basui had sought guidance had all sanctioned his enlightenment. But Koho, sensing Basui's keen, sensitive mind and the strength and purity of his yearning for truth, did not give him his stamp of approval but merely invited him to remain. On his part, Basui recognized in Koho a great Rashi but declined to stay in his temple, taking a solitary hut in the nearby hills and for the next month coming daily to see Koho. One day Koho, sensing the ripeness of Basui's mind, asked him, "Tell me, what is Josh's mu?" Basui started to reply. "Mountains and rivers, grass and trees, are equally mu," and Koho stopped him with, "Don't use your mind." All at once, his biographer relates, Basui felt as though he had lost his life root, like a barrel whose bottom had been smashed open. Sweat began to stream from every pore of his body. And when he left Koho's room he was in such a daze that he bumped his head several times along the walls trying to find the outer gate of the temple. Upon reaching his hut he wept for hours from his very depths. The tears overflowed, pouring down his face like rain. In the intense combustion of this overwhelming experience, Basui's previously held conceptions and beliefs, we are told, were utterly annihilated. The following evening Basui came to tell Koho what had happened. Hardly had he opened his mouth when Koho, who had despaired of ever finding a true successor among his monks, declared, as though addressing all his followers, "My Dharma will not vanish. All may now be happy. My Dharma will not disappear." Koho formally conferred Inka on his disciple and gave him the Zen name Basui. High above average. Basui remained for 2 months near Koho, receiving his instructions and guidance. But Basui, who had a strong and independent mind, wished to mature his profound experience through Dharma combat with accomplished masters so as to integrate his experience thoroughly into his conscious mind and into his every act, and to develop his capacity to teach others. So he left Koho and continued to live an isolated life in forests, hills, and mountains not far from the temples of famous masters. When not engaging them in Dharma combat he would carry on his zazen for hours at a time. Wherever he stayed zealous aspirants quickly discovered his whereabouts and sought his guidance. But feeling himself still deficient in the spiritual strength necessary to lead others to liberation, he resisted their efforts to make him their teacher. When their entreaties became importunate he would pick up his meager belongings and vanish in the night. Apart from the entreaties of would-be disciples, however, he deliberately curtailed his stay in any one place so as not to become attached to it. At length, now 50, Basui built himself a hut deep in a mountain near the town of Enzan in Yamanashi Prefecture. As had happened in the past, word spread through the nearby village of the presence in the mountain of a bodhisattva, and seekers again began literally to beat a path to his hut. Now, his enlightenment having ripened and feeling himself capable of leading others to emancipation, he no longer turned away from these seekers but willingly accepted all who came. Soon they became a sizable flock, and when the governor of the province offered to donate land for a monastery and his followers to build it, Basui agreed to become its Rashi. Although Basui disliked the designation temple or monastery, Kagakuji at its apogee, with more than 1,000 monks and lay devotees, could hardly be described as a hermitage. Basui was a rigid disciplinarian, and of the 33 rules he promulgated for the behavior of his disciples, interestingly enough, the first prohibited the imbibing of alcohol in any form. Just before he passed away, at the age of 60, Basui sat up in the lotus posture and, to those gathered around him, said, "Don't be misled. Look directly. What is this? He repeated this loudly and then calmly died. The teaching methods of all great masters inevitably grow out of their own particular personalities, their spiritual questioning, and the mode of zazen which gave birth to their enlightenment. 4. Dogen, whose religious strivings came to a focus in a problem totally different from Basui's and whose full awakening came without a koan of any kind, Shikantaza became the prime teaching method. Basui's natural koan, on the other hand, was who is the master? 4. And therefore, as we see in the following letters, he urges his disciples to employ this mode of zazen. Moreover, since Basui, like Dogen, could not wholly satisfy his deep inner longing for liberation through shallow enlightenment, the goal he holds out in these letters is nothing short of full awakening. Basui was not a prolific writer. Besides his Dharma talk on One Mind and these letters, he wrote a single large volume called Waidayagasui, setting forth the principles and practices of Zen Buddhism, and a smaller work. Just when Basui wrote One Mind and the letters is unknown, since none of them bears a date, but presumably they were written after he had become master of Kagakuji. Evidently his correspondents were disciples who either were too sick or lived too far away to come to Kagakuji for sesshin and personal instruction. Only such extenuating circumstances and the manifest ardor and sincerity of his correspondence could have persuaded Basui to instruct them by letter instead of by traditional methods. True, some of the letters are repetitious, but this is inevitable since Basui is giving the same teaching in essence to each of his correspondents. Yet it is by just such repetition that Basui, master that he is, superbly clarifies and hammers home his theme of one mind. There is little in Zen literature written by outstanding masters which is so squarely aimed at practice or is as inspiring as these writings. Basui speaks as directly to the reader of today as he did to his correspondents of the 14th century, guiding and inspiring at every turn. Added to this is a pungent sense of paradox coupled with a profound simplicity which has made the Dharma talk and these letters immensely popular in Japan right down to the present day. Takuzui Zenji, a well-known Zen master of the Tokugawa period, who, like Joshu, is said to have lived to the ripe age of 120, and who himself was the writer of a number of Zen letters, warmly praised both these writings as valuable not only for devotees but even for Zen masters. It is hoped that with this translation, the first into English, they will find equal favor with English-speaking readers eager to understand and practice Zen. The talk. If you would free yourself of the sufferings of samsara, you must learn the direct way to become a Buddha. This way is no other than the realization of your own mind. Now what is this mind? It is the true nature of all sentient beings, that which existed before our parents were born and hence before our own birth, and which presently exists, unchangeable and eternal. So it is called one's face before one's parents were born. This mind is intrinsically pure. When we are born it is not newly created, and when we die it does not perish. It has no distinction of male or female, nor has it any coloration of good or bad. It cannot be compared with anything, so it is called Buddha nature. Yet countless thoughts issue from this self-nature as waves arise in the ocean or as images are reflected in a mirror. To realize your own mind you must first of all look into the source from which thoughts flow. Sleeping and working, standing and sitting, profoundly ask yourself, what is my own mind? With an intense yearning to resolve this question. This is called training or practice or desire for truth or thirst for realization. What is termed zazen is no more than looking into one's own mind. It is better to search your own mind devotedly than to read and recite innumerable sutras and dharni every day for countless years. Such endeavors, which are but formalities, produce some merit, but this merit expires, and again you must experience the suffering of the three evil paths. Because searching one's own mind leads ultimately to enlightenment, this practice is a prerequisite to becoming a Buddha. No matter whether you have committed either the 10 evil deeds or the 5 deadly sins, if you turn back your mind and enlighten yourself, you are a Buddha instantly. But do not commit sins and expect to be saved by enlightenment from the effects of your own actions, for neither enlightenment nor a Buddha nor a Bodhisattva